The relentless, acidic downpour of Relan hammered against the reinforced dome of Dr. Damien Croft's laboratory, creating a constant, monotonous drumming that mirrored his mounting frustration. Another attempt to map the planet's perplexing energy anomalies had ended in failure. The data on his holographic display was a jumbled mess of indecipherable information, a visual representation of his failed efforts. "Marvelous," he muttered sarcastically, running a hand through his already disheveled dark hair. 3 months of rigorous calculations had yielded absolutely nothing. The advanced equipment surrounding him hummed with a barely contained power, casting an eerie, blue glow across the stark white walls of the lab. His communication device suddenly chimed. "Dr. Croft," an automated voice announced, "your weekly supply delivery has been rerouted to the lower markets due to atmospheric disturbances." Damien sighed, reaching for his protective coat. The lower markets were precisely the kind of chaotic environment he preferred to avoid, a teeming mass of diverse human and alien species crammed into the underground caverns of Rand's old mining system. Yet, without those crucial supplies, his research would grind to a complete halt. The descent into the markets was a direct assault on his senses. Neon signs flickered and pulsed in dozens of different languages, while the air grew thick with the heavy scents of exotic foods and mechanical oils. Merchants called out their wares in a cacophony of dialects, their voices echoing off the rough, carved stone walls. "Your supplies are in Section 8, his communication unit chirped, "but that section is currently restricted." Damien frowned. "Restricted?" The unit fell silent. Its programming was likely experiencing a conflict between information sharing and local regulations. As he pushed his way through the bustling crowd, the legitimate stalls began to thin out. These were replaced by shadier establishments. The lighting grew dimmer, and the crowd changed, with fewer ordinary citizens and more figures in hooded cloaks, their suspicious bulges hinting at concealed weapons. A muffled scream caught his attention from down a narrow corridor. A heavy door stood ajar, offering a glimpse of what lay beyond. Damien's scientific curiosity warred with his common sense. After a moment's hesitation, he slipped inside. The scene that greeted him caused him to freeze in place. Cages lined the walls, each one filled with beings from across the galaxy. It was clearly a slave market. His stomach churned at the abhorrent sight. However, before he could retreat, something impossible caught his eye. In the furthest cage, barely visible in the dim light, sat a female figure with skin the color of deep ocean waters. Her eyes glowed with an inner luminescence that pulsed like distant stars. A Halen, the member of the legendary, Lost Civilization. "Interested in that one," a gravelly voice said, causing Damien to jump. A corpulent merchant had materialized beside him, his smile revealing several gold-capped teeth. "Rare specimen, though defective." Damien's scientific mind suddenly kicked into overdrive, momentarily eclipsing his horror. "Defective?" "No energy manipulation abilities, useless for power generation," the merchant shrugged. "Still, the exotic look alone makes her valuable to certain collectors." The Halen's eyes met Damien's. Despite the heavy chains binding her and the metallic collar around her neck, her gaze held neither fear nor submission. It instead was filled with a calculating intelligence that seemed to pierce right through him. "How much?" The words had left his mouth before he could stop them. Minutes later, Damien found himself leading his purchase through the shadowy back alleys of the market. The Halen moved with fluid grace despite her restraints, easily keeping pace with him. "I suppose I should introduce myself," he said awkwardly. "I'm Dr. Damien Croft." "How formal," she replied, her voice carrying a melodic lilt that seemed to dance between musical notes. "Does it make you feel better about buying a person, Doctor?" Damien winced. "I'm trying to help." Her tone dripped with sarcasm. "My name is Ilara, though I'm sure you'd prefer to call me Specimen or Subject. I would prefer to call you by your name." They reached his laboratory and Damien quickly ushered her inside. "And I'm going to remove that collar." Ilara's luminescent eyes widened slightly. "That would be unwise. According to your species, I'm a scientist. Being unwise is practically in the job description." Damien reached for the collar's complex locking mechanism. "Hold still." The moment the collar clicked open, the air in the laboratory seemed to crackle with an invisible energy. Ilara took a deep breath, her luminescent eyes flaring brighter. "Freedom," she whispered, then shot him a sharp look. "Though I'm still essentially your prisoner, aren't I?" "You're not my prisoner." Damien moved to his workstation, deliberately turning his back to her, a demonstration of trust. "You're free to leave, though I admit I hope you'll stay long enough to let me study your energy signature, for purely scientific purposes." A musical laugh escaped her. "At least you're honest about your motivations." She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the metal floor. "And what would I get in return for being your research subject?" "Protection, resources, and maybe," Damien gestured to his equipment, "help understanding why your abilities are different from others of your kind." "Different?" Ilara's voice turned bitter. "You mean defective?" "I don't believe in defective people," Damien replied firmly, "only in systems that fail to understand them." Ilara reached out, absently touching a broken console on his desk. To Damien's astonishment, the dead screen flickered to life, its circuits rebuilding themselves under her fingertips. "Well," she said with a hint of surprise, "that's new." Before Damien could respond, every alarm in his laboratory began blaring at once. On his screens, energy readings spiked off the charts. "Interesting," Ilara mused, studying the displays. "It seems I'm not so defective after all." Her eyes met his, a challenge in their glow. "Still want to study me, Doctor?" Damien's reply was cut short by a priority alert flashing across his screen. It was a message from Rillian security forces requesting immediate information about any unusual energy signatures in his sector. He quickly deleted the message. "I think," he said carefully, "we should discuss this somewhere more private." A slight smile curved Ilara's blue lips. "Now that's the first sensible thing you've said all day." As Damien led Ilara to his secure research chamber, he couldn't help but notice how she examined everything with keen interest. Her luminescent eyes taking in every detail of his laboratory. "Your equipment is primitive," she remarked, trailing her fingers along a row of energy sensors. Each one lit up at her touch, their readings jumping erratically, though I suppose that's to be expected from someone who still uses binary systems. "Primitive?" Damien raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite her proximity. "This is cutting-edge technology." "How adorable," Ilara's lips curved into a teasing smile. "You really believe that, don't you?" She moved to his main workstation, her blue skin glowing under the harsh laboratory lights. The simple grey jumpsuit he'd given her to replace her tattered clothes did little to diminish her ethereal presence. "Your entire approach to energy manipulation is backwards," she continued, gesturing at his calculations. "You're trying to force it into your mathematical models instead of feeling its natural flow." "Because science requires measurable data," Damien argued, stepping closer to point at a particular equation. "You can't just." His words cut off as Ilara grabbed his hand and pressed it against the nearest energy conduit. A tingling sensation shot up his arm. "Feel that?" she asked, her voice soft but intense. "That's raw energy. It's not meant to be trapped in your neat little formulas." Damien tried to focus on the sensation rather than the warmth of her hand on his. "It's erratic, it's alive." Ilara released his hand but stayed close. "Your people treat energy like a tool to be controlled, my people understood it as a dance partner." "Is that why they put those collars on you?" Or the words came out harsher than he intended, "because they feared your dance." Ilara's eyes flashed. "They put collars on us because they fear what they can't quantify." She moved even closer, forcing him to step back until he hit his desk. "Tell me, Dr. Croft, do I make you uncomfortable?" "No," he lied. "Your elevated heart rate suggests otherwise." Her smile turned predatory. "I can sense your bioelectrical field, you know, every spike of adrenaline, every nervous impulse." "That's fascinating." From a scientific perspective, Damien managed, trying to maintain his professional facade. Ilara laughed, the sound like chimes in a breeze. "You hide behind science like armor, don't you?" She finally stepped back, giving him room to breathe. "It's almost cute." Before Damien could formulate a response, one of his secondary monitors began beeping urgently. He welcomed the distraction, moving to check the alert. "We have a problem," he said, scanning the incoming data. "Security forces are conducting an energy sweep of this sector. Your presence is causing significant readings. Then we should give them something else to track." Ilara closed her eyes, and suddenly every piece of equipment in the lab surged with power before going dark. Damien stared at her in amazement. "How did you?" "I told you," she smirked. "It's a dance." She moved toward his private quarters. "Now, unless you want to explain to security why you have an unregistered Halen in your lab, I suggest we continue this conversation somewhere more discreet." "Right," Damien agreed, following her while trying to ignore how gracefully she moved, "but we're going to discuss the proper handling of sensitive equipment later." "Oh, I'm sure we'll discuss many things, Doctor." Ilara glanced back at him, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Like your absolutely fascinating choice in interior decoration. Does everything you own come in shades of grey?" Despite the dangerous situation, Damien found himself fighting back a smile. This was definitely not how he'd expected his day to go when he'd headed to the markets for supplies, but as he watched Ilara examining his living space with playful criticism, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "The grey is practical," he defended. "Practical?" She picked up one of his identical grey coats. "Is that what you call having a wardrobe that makes you look like a walking storm cloud? Would you prefer I dressed like a walking bioluminescent display?" The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them, but Ilara just laughed, the sound brightening the stark room. "There might be hope for you yet, Dr. Croft," she said, her eyes sparkling. "You actually have a sense of humor buried under all that science." The security sweep forced them to remain confined in Damien's quarters, a space that suddenly felt much smaller with Ilara in it. She'd made herself comfortable on his lone chair, legs tucked beneath her, examining a handheld energy scanner with obvious amusement. "Your civilization treats energy like it's a prisoner," she observed, turning the device over in her hands. "All these barriers and containment fields, as opposed to letting it run wild." Damien leaned against his desk, trying to maintain a professional distance that seems dangerous. Ilara's eyes flickered up to meet his. "Like me?" "I didn't say that, but you thought it." She set down the scanner and rose with fluid grace. "You humans are always so afraid of what you can't control." "I'm not afraid of you," Damien said firmly. "No?" She moved closer, and the air seemed to crackle between them. "Then why are your energy readings spiking, Doctor?" Damien cleared his throat. "Professional curiosity. Is that what you call it?" Ilara reached past him to pick up another piece of equipment, her arm barely brushing his. The contact sent a literal spark between them. "Oops, sorry about that." Still adjusting to being uncolored. "That's fascinating," Damien managed, trying to focus on the scientific implications rather than her proximity. "The collar must have been suppressing your natural electromagnetic field." Always the scientist, Ilara smiled, but there was something sad in her luminescent eyes. Even when a woman is literally throwing sparks at you, you retreat into analysis. "I'm not retreating," he protested. "I'm observing." "Then observe this." She deliberately placed her hand on his forearm. This time, instead of a spark, there was a gentle warmth that spread up his arm, accompanied by tiny dancing lights that swirled around their point of contact. "That's..." Damien watched, transfixed. "How are you doing that?" "I'm not doing anything, it's the energy responding to..." She paused, searching for words. "Let's call it compatibility." "Compatibility?" His voice came out embarrassingly hoarse. She withdrew her hand, and the lights faded. "Your energy signature is interesting. Most humans feel like static noise, but you..." She tilted her head, studying him. "You're more like a melody." The security scanner on his desk chose that moment to begin beeping urgently, making them both jump. Damien checked the readings, grateful for the distraction. "They're moving on to the next sector," he reported. "We should be safe for now." "Safe is boring," Ilara declared, wandering over to his bookshelf, actual physical books, one of his few indulgencies. "Oh, what's this?" "Theoretical applications of quantum mechanics." Like bedtime reading? Some of us enjoy expanding our minds, and some of us, she plucked the book from the shelf with deliberate slowness, prefer expanding our experiences. She flipped through the pages, though, I suppose you get all the excitement you need from your energy anomaly research. My research is important, Damien defended, though he couldn't help noticing how the blue of her skin contrasted beautifully with the aged paper. Of course it is. She replaced the book and turned to face him. That's why you spent your credits buying a slave instead of new equipment. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. That was different, he said quietly, I couldn't just leave you there. Ilara's expression softened slightly. No, I suppose you couldn't. Your energy signature practically screamed distress in that market. She stepped closer again. You're a terrible liar, Damien Croft. All that talk about scientific interest, but really, she placed a hand over his heart, you're just a romantic hiding behind a scientist's mask. Damien felt the warmth of her touch spread through his chest. I prefer to think of it as practical compassion. Practical compassion? Ilara laughed, the sound making the lights in the room flicker. Is that what they're calling it these days? She removed her hand, but stayed close. Well, your practical compassion saved me from a very unpleasant fate, so perhaps I shouldn't tease you quite so much. I wouldn't know what to do if you stopped, Damien admitted before he could stop himself. Ilara's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with genuine amusement. Dr. Croft, was that actually flirting? I'm shocked, should I check the equipment for malfunctions? I am capable of non-scientific interaction, he protested, feeling his face warm. Evidence suggests otherwise, she countered, but her smile was warm, though I suppose you're full of surprises, first, breaking the law to free a slave, then harboring said slave from authorities, she ticked off points on her fingers, and now attempting to flirt, what's next? Dancing? Let's not get carried away. Their shared laughter was interrupted by another alert from his system. This one made Damien's blood run cold. What is it? Ilara asked, noting his expression. Official inquiry from Central Command, he said grimly, they're requesting access to all my recent energy reading logs. Ilara's playful demeanor vanished. They're looking for me. Yes. Damien straightened, his mind racing, but they won't find you, I promise. She studied him for a long moment. More practical compassion? No, he met her glowing gaze steadily. This time, it's personal. Damien spent the next 3 hours meticulously altering his research logs, while Ilara watched with growing amusement. You know, she said, perched on his desk, for someone so dedicated to scientific accuracy, you're surprisingly good at falsifying data. I prefer to think of it as data interpretation. Damien's fingers flew across the holographic interface. Besides, they're looking for unusual energy spikes. If I can make your signature look like typical Relan anomalies, always trying to fit things into neat little boxes, Ilara leaned over his shoulder, her presence making the screens flicker, you should let me help. Last time you helped with the equipment, it took me 2 days to recalibrate everything. But it worked better afterward, didn't it? Damien couldn't argue with that. Since Ilara had started assisting in his lab, his research had progressed more in 2 weeks than in the previous 6 months. Though he suspected that had less to do with her technical help and more with how she'd completely upended his methodical approach to everything. Your energy readings are all wrong, she commented, reaching past him to touch the display. The numbers immediately began shifting. There, now it looks natural. Natural chaos, you mean? But he had to admit, the new patterns looked more authentic. Exactly, she smiled, her luminescent eyes reflecting in the screen. Life isn't meant to be perfectly ordered. Damien, sometimes chaos is exactly what we need. As if to prove her point, she ran her fingers through his perpetually neat hair, messing it up completely. Damien tried to look annoyed, but the tingling sensation her touch left behind made it difficult to maintain his stern expression. I have a reputation to maintain, you know. Yes, as the most boring scientist on Relan, she said, her gaze sweeping over his grey outfit. Don't worry, your reputation is safe, though we really need to discuss your wardrobe choices. What's wrong with my clothes? They make you look like a walking rain cloud. She tugged at his sleeve. Don't you own anything with actual color? Gray is professional. Gray is depressing. Ilara's skin seemed to glow brighter with her amusement. No wonder you were so fascinated by me. I'm probably the first bit of color you've seen in years. Before Damien could respond, his security system chimed, incoming transmission from Central Command. The playful atmosphere evaporated. Ilara moved to leave, but Damien caught her wrist. Stay, they can't detect you through a standard transmission. The stern face of Commander Voss filled the screen. Dr. Croft, I trust you received our inquiry about your energy readings. Yes, Commander. I've prepared a full report. Damien kept his voice steady, acutely aware of Ilara's presence just out of view, though I'm not sure why Central Command is interested in standard anomaly readings. Standard? Voss's eyes narrowed. Our sensors detected a Class 5 energy surge in your sector 2 weeks ago. That's hardly standard. Ah, yes. Damien pulled up his data. That was a fascinating occurrence, you see, when the planetary magnetic field interacts with. Spare me the scientific lecture, Doctor. Voss cut him off. We have reason to believe you're harboring a fugitive, a very valuable fugitive. Damien felt Ilara tense beside him. I assure you, Commander, the only things I'm harboring are various examples of malfunctioning equipment. Really? Voss leaned closer to the screen. Then you won't mind if we send a team to inspect your facility, for safety reasons? Of course, Damien forced a smile, though you'll need to file the proper research interference paperwork. As you know, my work is quite sensitive to disruption. The paperwork has already been filed. Expect us within the hour. The screen went dark. Ilara immediately pulled away from Damien, her eyes blazing. You need to let me leave, she said. They'll arrest you if they find me here. They won't find you. Don't be naive. Energy crackled around her like static electricity. I won't let you risk everything just to protect me. I'm not worth. Damien stepped closer, ignoring the small shocks her agitated state was causing. You are not some piece of property to be handed over. You're brilliant and fascinating and incredibly annoying when you mess with my equipment, and I'm not letting them take you. Ilara stared at him, her glow fluctuating with emotion. Why? Because I'm a valuable research subject? Because you're you. The words came out before he could analyze them. Because you turned my perfectly organized life into beautiful chaos, and I. He stopped, surprised by the intensity of his own feelings. The lights in the lab began to flicker wildly. Ilara looked down at her hands, which were emanating waves of visible energy. I can't control it, she whispered. When I feel too much, it just then don't control it. Damien reached for her hands, ignoring the electricity that made his hair stand on end. We'll figure this out together, but first, I have a plan. Does it involve more grey clothing? Despite the tension, Damien found himself smiling. Actually, it involves creating the biggest energy anomaly Relan has ever seen. Your plan is insane, Ilara said, watching Damien rapidly reconfigure his lab equipment. Brilliantly insane, but still insane. Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment. He connected another power converter, creating a web of energy conduits around the lab. If we can't hide your energy signature, we amplify it, create so many anomalies they won't know which to investigate first. And you think this will work? Because you're going to teach me how to dance with energy. He turned to her, extending his hand. That's what you've been trying to tell me, isn't it? That I need to stop trying to control it and start feeling it? Ilara's eyes widened in surprise. You actually were listening. I always listen to you, I just usually disagree. She laughed, taking his hand. Immediately, the air around them began to shimmer with visible energy patterns. All right, Professor Know-It-All, first lesson in energy dancing, close your eyes. That seems unsafe, says the man about to create an artificial energy storm, but her voice was fond. Trust me. Damien closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, the subtle vibrations of power flowing between them. Now, Ilara's voice came closer. Forget everything you know about energy matrices and quantum fields. Feel the current running through the lab. It's alive, breathing, wanting to move. This isn't very scientific, he murmured. Shush. Her other hand touched his chest, right over his heart. Science is just one way of understanding the universe. There are others. As if responding to her words, the energy in the room began to pulse, creating patterns he could feel rather than see. It was like standing in the middle of a living symphony. That's incredible, he breathed. Open your eyes. The lab had transformed. Streams of light danced between the equipment, forming complex geometric patterns that shifted and flowed like liquid mathematics. At the center, Ilara glowed like a blue star, her eyes bright with excitement and something else he couldn't quite name. A warning alarm shattered the moment. Security forces approaching the system, an automated voice announced, estimated arrival 15 minutes. Time to cause some chaos? Ilara asked, her hand still in his. Time to cause some chaos, Damien agreed, though I still think we should have a more detailed plan. Ilara pressed her finger to his lips, sending a tiny shock through him. Less thinking, more feeling. She moved to the main power hub, her natural energy already beginning to interact with the modified equipment. Ready? Before Damien could answer, she placed both hands on the central console. Light exploded outward, racing along the conduits. Heat radiated through the lab. The lab's energy readings went off the scale as waves of power began pulsing through the facility. This is definitely going to void my equipment warranty, Damien muttered, but he couldn't help grinning as he watched Ilara direct the energy flows like a conductor leading an orchestra. The security system chimed again. Multiple vessels detected entering local airspace, energy anomalies detected in sectors 2 through 7. It's working! Ilara called over the growing hum of power. They're splitting up to investigate the different signatures. Damien moved to join her at the console, adding his own adjustments to the energy flow. Every time their hands touched, new patterns emerged, more complex and beautiful than before. You're actually getting good at this, Ilara remarked, her voice tinged with pride. I have an excellent teacher, he replied, though she's terrible at following safety protocols. Safety is overrated. She bumped her shoulder against his, sending cascades of light rippling through the air. Admit it, you're enjoying this. I admit nothing, but he couldn't hide his smile, though I might be developing a new appreciation for controlled chaos. Controlled? Ilara raised an eyebrow, then deliberately touched a panel that sent a surge of power through the lab, making all the lights flash in a dazzling display. Where's the fun in that? The moment of triumph was interrupted by a heavy pounding at the lab's main door. Commander Voss's voice boomed through the speakers, Dr. Croft, open this door immediately. Ilara's playful expression vanished. The energy around her began to intensify, turning from beautiful patterns into something more volatile. Ilara, Damien said softly, recognizing the signs of her losing control. Stay with me. They'll take me back, she whispered, her voice cracking. Put the collar on again, lock me away. The pounding grew louder. Equipment began to spark and smoke as Ilara's fear translated into raw power. Look at me. Damien stepped in front of her, ignoring the electricity now crackling across his skin. No one is taking you anywhere. You're not alone anymore. Her eyes met his, glowing so bright they almost hurt to look at. Why are you doing this, Damien? Because the door behind them began to glow red as security forces tried to cut through it. Damien knew he had seconds to make her understand, because you were right. I spent my whole life trying to understand the universe through equations and data, then you came along and showed me how to feel it instead, and he took a breath, I can't go back to grey. The lab erupted in a blinding flash of light. Ilara's power surged through every system, overloading the security barriers and blasting open a path through the back wall. Without hesitation, Damien grabbed her hand and ran, pulling her through the smoking breach just as Commander Voss's forces breached the main door. This way. Ilara's voice guided him through the chaos, her natural glow illuminating their path through Rand's ancient mining tunnels. I can feel something calling to me. Please tell me it's not more security forces, Damien panted, hearing shouts echoing behind them. No, she suddenly stopped, placing her hand against the rough stone wall. Here, there's energy behind this, old energy, like coming home. Before Damien could respond, her power flowed into the rock face, revealing intricate patterns that had been invisible before. The wall shifted, opening to reveal a hidden passage. Well, Damien managed, that's definitely not in any of the geological surveys. Elara shot him an amused look, despite their dire situation. Still trying to categorize everything. Old habits. He followed her into the passage, which sloped sharply downward, though I'm learning to appreciate surprises. The tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern, and both of them stopped short. There, suspended in ancient support cradles, was a ship unlike anything Damien had ever seen. Its hull seemed to be made of crystalline material that pulsed with its own inner light, responding to Elara's presence. "It's a Halen vessel," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "I thought they were all destroyed. Can you access it?" "I don't know." She approached the ship, reaching out to touch its surface. The crystal immediately brightened, patterns of light racing across its hull. "It knows me somehow, it knows what I am." Security forces' voices echoed down the tunnel behind them. Damien quickly sealed the entrance, but he knew it wouldn't hold them for long. "Any chance that ship is operational?" he asked, scanning for other exits. "It's dormant," Elara replied, her hands moving across what appeared to be a control panel. "The systems are locked, waiting for," she frowned, "waiting for someone with the pure spark." "The what?" "It's an old term in my people's language. It refers to those who could communicate directly with the universe's energy without technological aids." Her voice grew bitter, the ability I was supposedly lacking. Damien moved closer, watching as the ship responded to her touch with increasingly complex light patterns. "I don't think you lack anything. Look at how it's reacting to you." "But I can't control it properly, the power, it's too, maybe that's the point." Damien studied the ancient symbols appearing on the hull. "Your people weren't trying to control energy, remember? They were dancing with it." Elara's eyes widened in understanding. "The pure spark, it's not about control at all, it's about harmony." The ship's crystal surface began to sing, producing tones that made the air vibrate. Elara closed her eyes, and her natural glow synchronized with the vessel's pulses. A massive explosion rocked the cavern. Security forces began pouring in through multiple breaches, armed with energy-dampening weapons. "Step away from the alien vessel," Commander Voss's voice boomed. "This is your final warning." "Elara," Damien said quietly, "whatever you're going to do, do it fast." She opened her eyes, which now shone with the same crystalline light as the ship. "I need you to trust me, always." She grabbed his hand and pressed it against the ship's hull. Immediately, energy coursed through him, not painful, but overwhelming in its intensity. He could feel everything, the ship's ancient systems awakening, the power flowing through Elara, even the very fabric of space seeming to twist around them. "What are you doing?" Voss demanded. "Showing you what a defective Harlaner can really do," Elara answered, her voice resonating with power. The ship's crystal structure began to phase, becoming transparent and then solid again in pulses. Energy weapons fired, but their beams were absorbed into the growing field of power surrounding the vessel. Then, everything went wrong. One of Voss's men fired an experimental weapon, a dark matter disruptor. The beam struck Damien in the chest, and he felt his connection to reality begin to fade. "No!" Elara's scream shattered every piece of equipment in the cavern. She caught Damien as he fell, cradling him as his vision began to darken. "Sorry," he managed, tasting blood, "guess I won't get to see how this dance ends." "Don't you dare!" She hissed, and suddenly, he felt her power flowing into him, different from before. This wasn't the wild energy of their experiments, or the ancient power of the ship, this was pure life force. Elara's own essence pouring into him. "Stop," he tried to say, "you'll burn yourself out." "Shut up and let me save you." Tears fell from her glowing eyes, each one sparkling with energy where they landed. "I finally found someone worth dancing with. I'm not losing you to these primitive weapons." The cavern filled with blinding light as Ilara's power reached its peak. Damien felt the wound in his chest heal, felt his heart begin to beat and sync with the ship's crystal pulses. When his vision cleared, he saw Voss and his men unconscious on the ground, their weapons reduced to slag. That, he said weakly, was definitely not in any scientific paper on Halen abilities. Ilara laughed through her tears, the sound making the ship's crystals chime in harmony. Still collecting data, always. He reached up to touch her face, feeling the lingering connection between them from her healing energy. Though, I might need to revise my previous theories about defective specimens. Might need to? She helped him stand, both of them now glowing faintly with shared power. Definitely need to. He looked around at the unconscious security forces. We should probably leave before they wake up. Good idea. Ilara turned to the ship, which had fully awakened, its crystal hull now transparent enough to reveal an interior that seemed to be made of pure light. Care to help me steal an ancient spaceship? I prefer to think of it as emergency artifact requisition for research purposes. Her laugh echoed through the cavern as they boarded the vessel. You never stop being a scientist, do you? Would you want me to? No, she placed her hands on the crystalline controls, and the ship hummed to life. You wouldn't be my adorably rigid Damien if you did. As the ship rose through the cavern ceiling, phasing through solid rock like it was mist, Damien watched Ilara guide it with the same fluid grace she'd brought to his life. Where to? She asked as stars became visible through the crystal hull. Anywhere, he replied, as long as it's not grey. The crystalline ship glided through space, its hull shimmering with patterns that matched Ilara's moods. 3 days into their escape from Relan, Damien was still adjusting to life aboard a vessel that seemed more alive than mechanical. You're doing it again, Ilara called from the control interface, where she was communing with the ship's systems, staring at the readings instead of feeling them. These energy patterns are fascinating, Damien defended, studying his modified scanner. The ship's crystal matrix seems to. The scanner suddenly floated out of his hands, suspended in a web of blue energy. Ilara smirked as she made it dance just out of his reach. Show off, he muttered, though he couldn't help smiling. Someone needs to keep you from turning our magical ancient spaceship into another boring research project. She let the scanner drop back into his hands, but not before giving him a small static shock. Besides, you love it when I show off. Before Damien could respond, the ship's harmonic tones changed, becoming discordant. Warning patterns rippled across the crystal walls. What's wrong? Damien moved to join Ilara at the controls. The ship is detecting something familiar, her brow furrowed in concentration, energy signatures it recognizes from the slave market. Damien's blood ran cold. That's impossible, we're light years from Relan. The market wasn't just on Relan. Ilara's hands moved across the crystal interface, bringing up ghostly holographic displays. It was part of a network, and her voice caught, look who's leading the nearest hunting party. The image that formed in the air made Damien's jaw clench. Commander Voss's face appeared, but he wasn't wearing his Central Command uniform anymore. Instead, he wore the elaborate robes of a high-ranking slave merchant. He was never really security forces, was he? Damien said quietly. No. Ilara's glow dimmed with the painful memory. He was one of the top traders, specialized in rare specimens, like me. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure I could trust you. She met his eyes. You were a scientist who bought a slave. How was I supposed to know you weren't working with them? The hurt in her voice made Damien reach for her, but she pulled away. Damien, don't. Energy crackled around her. We have bigger problems. They're tracking us somehow. Damien forced himself to focus on the tactical situation. The ship's energy signature is unique. They must have. He stopped, a horrible realization hitting him. My research logs. Voss had access to all my data on your energy patterns, which means they can predict where we'll go based on the ship's resonance with my power. Ilara's hands clenched on the controls. We need to change course. Wait! Damien pulled up his own research files. Something's not right. These tracking algorithms, I've seen them before. He dug deeper into the data, following patterns he'd originally attributed to standard Central Command protocols. What he found made his stomach turn. "These weren't designed by Voss," he said. "They're from my old mentor's work." "Director Vux, the head of your research decision?" "He always showed special interest in my energy anomaly studies." Damien's mind raced through years of conversations, seeing them in a new light. "He pushed me to take that posting on Relan, said it would be perfect for my research." "He set you up," Ilara's voice was flat, "put you exactly where they needed someone to find me." "But why me?" "Because you were perfect." She turned to face him, her eyes sad. Brilliant enough to recognize valuable data, isolated enough not to ask too many questions, and just lonely enough to be intrigued by a mysterious blue girl who dropped into your life. The words hit Damien like physical blows. "You think that's all this was? Some elaborate trap?" Energy flared around her. "Your mentor works with slave traders. Your whole career was probably engineered to." She never finished. The ship suddenly shuddered as something struck its hull, disrupting the crystal harmonics. Warning tones filled the air. "Multiple vessels approaching," Ilara reported, turning back to the controls, energy-dampening weapons charged. "Can we outrun them in this ship?" A fierce smile crossed her face. "We can do better than that." The crystal hull began to pulse with her power, transforming from transparent to mirror-bright. The pursuing ship's energy weapons reflected back at them, forcing them to scatter. "That's my girl," Damien muttered,